Jacob, so you're in Carmel. Want to tell us about it?
Yeah, I'm in Carmel. I'm assisting a longtime friend of mine on some of her properties. Yeah, it's fun. They're all very different and have very different needs. So, one is like light renovation and further activation. One is really, really sweet, and then it's just about like getting more sales and marketing through. And then she also has a glamping property, um, which is cool. And then that's interesting because of their entitlements, right? They can do event weekends, they can do short-term rental weekends, they can do corporate group weekends, but they can't do like short-term rental 365 7 days a week. So you really have to be selective on like what when you're pacing, what gets priority, what weekends are what, because it's very limited in the scope. So
How do
yeah,
you manage that?
I think, what's nice is they could do group and corporate retreats at any time. So I think you have an opportunity to kind of be more flexible with them. And then obviously the glamping weekends, like the short-term rental, they have to keep to the summer, right? But they could technically keep year-round business and retreats if they wanted to, or weddings, events. So yeah, you just protect the really key summer dates for short-term rental, and then try to sell out the rest for groups.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. And what type of stuff are you helping her out with or like recommending?
So we're doing some bathroom remodels, and one of her other. So she's like, "Okay, go do it." So like, I'm putting on my HGTV hat. So we're doing bathroom remodels one, and then just like signage, in-room signage, making sure that everything's branded, and then working a lot because there's about 30 minutes in between each property, but the locations are very different. So one's in Carmel Valley, which is like small wine town country, and then the Carmel by the Sea properties have a lot more competition, right? Because there's more rooms and more inventory, and the revenue management strategy is very important. Watching pace and pickup and occupancy is very important, and looking over at the comp set is very important for that, where the other ones you can kind of create your own compression because there's just not that many resources or inventory of rooms. So, yeah, they all have very different needs right now.
Very interesting. And this is an official Jacob Hospitality Consulting project.
Yeah, we didn't put a name on the company. Uh, I was like, Book Better is the name of my future Expedia killer. So I wonder if it's like Stay Better Hospitality Consulting or something like that. And then my partner's doing the food and beverage. So they're creating like a food trailer that could be used at one of the properties. So he's consulting on that, and they're going to build that out. He's doing the menu, and we'll do the training. So, yeah, and that will become the breakfast option. You can stay at one of her properties and go up to this food cart and order a really yummy breakfast burrito or, grains bowl or quinoa, breakfast quinoa salad, whatever that looks like.
Nice. Well, so starts the world domination of Jacob Halverson's
It's
consulting
not. It's not it. Every time
empire.
I'm like doing this out of necessity, guys. I need to save money to sell this house. So like, I don't like I don't want to work three jobs, but like I am like I am in like emergency adult mode right now. So yeah, and then also like flying back and forth from Santa Fe.
Yeah. Well, thanks for catching us up. Nick, what are we talking about today?
Well, we're talking about a topic that you suggested, Connor, and that you
Must
two
be
are.
good then.
um, and this is something that Jacob, I think we're going to be going to you a lot because you've obviously got a lot of experience in this in your various roles in hotels
Yeah.
and at Mendocino Grove. And Connor, I know you've got experience in this as well, and you've got some you've got some thoughts on recruiting, and I think it's something that you would say is a bit of a skill set of yours as well. So I'm kind of going to be leading the questions, I suppose, on this, but credit to Connor for coming up with a lot of this running order and some of the questions that we're going to be going through. And obviously, it's something that we haven't talked about before. We've touched on it, maybe with Blake Smith about hiring seasonal staff, for example, but really getting into the nitty gritty of recruiting isn't something that we've touched upon at all, really. So I'm excited. Connor, I know you're excited about this one as well.
I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely am. before I got into the outdoor space, I was a corporate recruiter for biotech scientists in San Francisco for 4 years, and everything from PhD postdoc scientists all the way up through executives, and I did okay at it. I ended up getting to be one of the top 20 in the world for our company. So and there is a whole science to it, and I think a lot of people, when they think about interviewing, they're like, oh, it's a gut check, or like it's a gut feel, but I think there really is some key patterns and processes that can make a huge difference. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
Was that how did that role work? Like, were you taking a lot of people out for dinner, or a lot of phone calls, or?
So basically, I would call up small biotech companies in California, and I'd say, "Hey, Mr. Chief Scientific Officer, I see you might be looking for oncologist. That's something I can help with. Basically, if you pay me, I'll go help you find those very specific people, of which there might only be a couple dozen in the country, and then I would go out and find those people, and then if they got hired, we got paid. So
nice. And you got paid.
We got paid. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Connor, and Jacob, actually, you tell us a little bit about your hiring experience as well in the various roles you've had.
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate, as some of the returning listeners, and I hope there's hundreds of thousands, will know, is like, I'm fortunate enough that I've opened 2 properties from ground up, right? So like full hiring for the full staff, without the benefits of having a recruiter, but maybe should do that next time. And yeah, so it's interesting. It's interesting when you're hiring. It's like, where is your business at, like what stage in the business, because that will determine kind of who you hire. So like an opening team will maybe be a different hire than someone that you're trying to assimilate into an already strong culture, or if you're looking for like a hire that is a catalyst to changing the culture, you might look for different needs from that person. So it's always nice to like know where your business is at in the moment that you're trying to hire that person, in the same kind of lane, like where are you going. But yeah, so my background is, as a general manager, I've just been hiring and hiring and hiring and hiring for all departments, really. Yeah, and then I less look at experience, and we'll dive into this, but it's about the person and their potential, and not necessarily what their resume says. In some aspects, because I think I'm a really good example of, like, my resume has never really matched the position that I've been hired for, but I've always tried to elevate and meet the job brief and go above and beyond. And people gave me opportunities when my resume said I shouldn't really get those opportunities. So yeah, I'm very passionate about hiring and what that looks like, but I think where business owners or managers should start is like, where are we in the business, and what are we trying to do, and the where, what, and whys of it all, right?
This is good. I think we're going to have like a fairly different perspective on recruitment, just from our roles in recruiting were really different. So I think it's going to be some good ping ponging. How many people do you think you have hired or been involved in hiring in your career?
Maybe over 125 so far, if I had to guess.
Damn.
Go on, Connor, what's your figure?
It's a lot less.
But it's way harder. I mean, you're talking about like, I'm filling up 30 employee FTEs. It's like way different. And seasonal employees, I've had a lot more opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the scientific world, it might have only been like 30 or 40. But they're like very specific high level positions or executives. And then I helped hire the 3 staff at Sage, who are all still there or just started. So.
In other words, it's 1-0 Jacob.
No, I think if you think of Connor's 3 for 3 on retaining employees, I probably lost a significant number of employees compared to Connor.
Yeah, we'll probably get to that towards the end, actually, when we touch upon mistakes that both of you have made in hiring. But I'm going to kick off with a question that Connor actually came up with, that is to do with kind of filtering out, I suppose, the people that you want in an organisation. Obviously, we're going to be focusing majorly on hospitality and glamping today, but it'll be relevant to anything really. So the kind of question came up with is, the Connor that question came up with. The question that Connor came up with is there are 100 strangers in the room, with each of them having a New Year's resolution. If I gave you $10,000 to guess which of them will most likely achieve those resolutions, and you have 30 minutes to interview them to help you make your guess, what questions do you ask them?
Oh my God. Well, clearly this is clicking me into the flow state here. I just got goosebumps. I'm like, wow, I've never been, look how nerdy I am. Never been asked such a good question. I would want to know how they would define major events that's happened to them in the last year, right? So I kind of want to know a little bit of history on what's leading up to this trajectory and the why behind the New Year's resolution. So if someone was like, my New Year's resolution is to like find somebody that I can go on a weekly coffee date with, it's like, okay, like what were the series of events that led up to that being your New Year's resolution within the last year, would help, I think, inform follow-up questions to that. So I'd like to know that. It's like, how many HIPAA laws can we break in this question? Like, is this a, we're talking about HR for a second. So it's just like, I would live within the rules of HR, right? Like, is that the guardrails, Connor, or do I get to like?
No. Well, I mean, I don't know. It's what maybe you would realistically ask, like a candidate you were interviewing.
Sure. Yeah. No, I would want to know what their last year was for sure. And then I would like to know how are they tracking this goal, or what does that look like, so I can figure out their personal accountability skills. And then I would like to also know, have they incentivized themselves when they reach this goal or not? And then how strong is that incentivize? And then how are they measuring? So kind of reverse engineer the SMART goal aspect of it, with that person, and probably the person that's gotten the most letters out of that acronym is going to be the most successful in reaching their goal.
Nice. I really like that. So you kind of looked historically at what happened to them and really trying to understand their motivation and the why. So it's like, how likely is that motivation going to continue, and how passionate are they about the motivation to hit that goal? And then diving into like, are they a good goal setter? Are they really breaking it down into the SMART framework, and which are proven to work? So I love that approach. The I guess in the way that I was trained is super simple, and it's basically your past is the best predictor of future performance. So for me, it would be, hey, tell me about your last 3 New Year's resolutions. What were they? What did you set out to do, and did you hit them? And basically, my bets would be, if I would just be interviewing all the candidates, and whoever had set New Year's resolutions in the previous years and hit them, that's who I would bet on, because the past is the best predictor of future performance. And that kind of segues into an overarching interview theme, and it's called behavioral interviewing, and it basically means every question that you're asking the candidate, or a lot of them, start with, tell me about a time when. And it's as simple as that. And you're making the candidates give you examples from their past of how they can show their skills to do the job that you need. Instead of, it's really easy for anyone to come into an interview about a New Year's resolution and say, oh, I'm going to wake up at 6 a.m. I'm going to, make coffee every day. I'm going to track this in my goal setter. Because obviously, everyone can do that, and probably does do that about their New Year's resolutions, but who's actually going to do it? And that's a harder thing to suss out.
I'm never getting hired in this. Like, I really, there's no way. I just have not lived my life in that. Like, I would be so screwed in this scenario. Yeah, but I've definitely had those interview strategies like used on me, Connor. Now that you say that, in college they give you one like human resourcing class, and maybe that was like between that, like that topic might have came up between like beer 30 and cornhole night, that very like finite amount of time where I did not recall that. But like it makes sense. I mean, every job I've ever had, I've been asked questions in that way. Any good job.
Jacob was too busy being a frat boy in college to. I definitely, we definitely are going to go deeper into the kind of questions that you would ask someone, particularly a kind of prospective glamping hire later on. But to start with, you obviously have to find the people to interview, and so let's start with you. If you were to kind of look for someone to hire, in a hospitality role, what would you do? Where would you look? Kind of how would you advertise it, and how do you bring people into the interview process?
The very first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna post the jobs online, and the biggest ones are gonna be LinkedIn and Indeed. LinkedIn might work a little bit better if it's more of like a corporate role. People who are a little more corporate are more active on LinkedIn, and then Indeed might be a little bit more focused on like service level. So the first thing is getting those up, right, and you need those to be up for a certain amount of time to have the candidates come in passively. So
Sure.
Miraculously for the 3 jobs that we posted for Sage that I hired for in the last 2 years, fortunately, and this is a cool thing for glamping, is like you work at a cool company. You have a big selling point about your offering is what you're doing. You're connecting people with nature, something unique, and that sets you above a hotel or a McDonald's or whatever it is who might be hiring. So like you're creating a cool place to work. So that's already interesting. And Sage had a big advantage that we were looking for remote roles, and we worked in outdoor hospitality consulting. So those are both really cool. So those helped. But I literally posted one job for each of those on LinkedIn, and we got over 100 applicants. Now it might be a lot more slim if it's geographically restricted, but that's the first thing. And then on top of that would be, you're just trying to cast as wide of a net and get this job availability out to as many people as you can. So social media is a great place. If you have a company, Instagram or Facebook, or there's a lot of Facebook groups focused on this. Like I was going to start hiring for a glamping site that was doing vintage trailers, and I started to look online, and there was Facebook groups about buying and selling vintage trailers or remodeling them. Just a bunch of people who are super nerdy about vintage trailers with 100,000 people in them. And that was going to be like the first place I was going to post about a job, because I know those people are interested and excited about it. So, posting in Facebook groups and online forums.
How long do you like that post to run, Connor? Like, is it like for me? I'm pretty short. I'm like, well, depending on the position, obviously. Like, the higher you go up the org chart, if you will, the longer that posting will probably live, I imagine. But if you're hiring kind of your supervisors, your hourly, or entry level managers, what is that? For me, I think it's like 2 weeks. And that's as much as that is, or did you not put parameters on that?
It's kind of as long as you need to get a good candidate flow. And it depends if you're doing paid or not paid. Like your first job post on LinkedIn is free, but if you want to do more than that, then you have to pay for it.
Right.
So it depends on if you're really having to pay for it and how much you can weigh that. But I mean, I would always want to leave it open for at least 2 weeks, and you might have a hard position and it might take a lot longer.
And the certainly for kind of yeah, I think there's absolutely room for hiring people on LinkedIn from LinkedIn for certainly kind of more senior hospitality roles, because there are a lot of people in that world that are on LinkedIn. What I actually found interesting that Bolt Farm Treehouse did literally the other day, and obviously bear in mind Bolt Farm have a huge Instagram following and just a huge following in general, so probably easier for them than a smaller site, but they post on Instagram. And actually, Jacob, I sent you the link, and it wasn't because there was a cash incentive, but I think it was a cash incentive where if you sent this Instagram post to someone in your network that you thought would be a good fit for, I can't remember what role it was specifically, then, and if they ended up getting hired, then the person that shared it would get, I think it was a cash reward,
Wow.
and obviously that's leveraging. Yeah, I didn't tell you that part when I sent you the role, but obviously I sent it because I thought you'd be great for it. But that's an example of a company who obviously have a big social media following. They're just leveraging it to find staff in untraditional ways, I suppose. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, totally. I like so I'm a big user of LinkedIn. I think I will only kind of apply for job. I've only applied for jobs posts on LinkedIn in the last 5 years, I would say. It's just like so knock on wood, not that I've only this is my second job in the last 5 years, so it's not like I've had a lot of different jobs, but yeah, I only like browse on LinkedIn. But at one time I really loved Poached, which is like kind of service industry specific. They have baristas, they have front desk agents, and it's right now it's only in major US markets. It started like Portland, Seattle, circa like 2013, 2014-ish, and then they've just grown and grown and grown. So I would look to Poached for our listeners that just also are in like LA, Portland, or near major markets to see if they can't bring somebody over a little bit outside of the rural area. If it is in a more rural area, see if you can. But so that's kind of a sneaky one that I don't think a lot of glamping operators think about, but I think it translates. And then we do a lot of work on Handshake, right, for those summer interns and getting those folks out there. So between LinkedIn, Handshake, and like Poached as needed, or
What's Handshake?
Handshake is a college portal in which you can sign up to be a business and then reach out to college students that are looking for internships.
And what do you think about generally hiring for hospitality roles people straight out of college?
It was so easy. I mean, it was the best hiring cycles I've ever had came from just looking for interns on Handshake, because you're unlike putting it online with no, and letting the algorithm do its work. This is the only place where you could target degree specific. You know what I'm saying? Like, go out and look for hospitality management, undergrads who have chosen to invest their time and money into this sector of business. It's crazy. It's crazy how focused, and it's just a different level. It's a different level because it's not a job, it's a career path. And so even if you get 1 or 2 years out of a really excellent employee, they've leveled up your culture regardless.
How would you compare someone who, let's say, someone who's gone straight into a hospitality role at 18 and worked their way up for 3 years versus someone who's gone to do some kind of hospitality degree and then they come out at 21, 22 and go straight into their first real world hospitality job? Do you generally see kind of a difference between those two types of people?
I mean, I think both people deserve to be there for different reasons, and I think both of those employees can add value to your company, no doubt. I did both, right? Like, I was like slinging pancakes, and I was like, "Are we still allowed to cuss on this podcast?"
Oh yeah,
Anyway.
please.
We don't have any advertisers to piss off, so
Yeah. It's just like I was the kid who was like 18, 19, like shaking ass in the alley of an IHOP, like making milkshakes and like messing around and like figuring out how to make fast cash and turntables and like quick hospitality. And that's what I did in the summer. And then during school year, I was like a hospitality management major, and a little bit more polished and refined. I think there's learnings from both avenues to getting that employee there. So yeah, I think at that point it really depends on the person. I wouldn't isolate anybody individual, but each applicant can bring value. They're just going to have different experiences on how they got there.
I think all things being equal, and obviously there's a lot of different factors that impact that, but just all things being equal, I'd probably lean slightly towards someone who's got the work experience over a college degree. My theory being that person's probably a lot more accustomed to responsibility and accountability. If they've been working for 3 years, they'll probably have bills to pay, and they're going to be a lot more motivated and adult-like. And I think a lot of people coming out of university for their first job, either, I think there's a wide range of people who had college paid for by their parents. And I think there might not be as much humility, and there is not as much hunger or a need. They might not have a need for that income as severely. I also love I love candidates who have put themselves through college and have student debt to get themselves through, and they really scrape by, because it shows a level of work ethic and commitment that's reliable, versus someone who maybe had college paid for and then they go out into the work world. They might just be a little bit more flippant with their responsibilities.
There's two ways to polish a stone, is what Connor's saying. And he would love his stone to go through 25 rapids of life, get tumbled in the dryer, so that, just joking. So get at your feet broken. I like the stone that was carried on a velvet pillow. To my front door. No, I think, Connor's right. Being hungry is important, and learnings from real world situations, there's definitely a huge value in that. This is where our personal experiences diverge, right? It would be hard, and if Connor was in his recruiting hat, he still has to pitch this candidate to his client. So it's a way harder pitch for a recruiter to say, no, I really believe in this person. I know they're fresh out of college. Instead of saying, here's what they've been doing for the last 3 years, and this is why they're ready. It's because Connor has to convince his client that that is worth paying him to have found that said person. Where it's if I'm just a GM sitting there, I'm not also selling the person that I found. So it's hard. You have to say, that client has to make Connor say yes to Connor. And at the same time, Connor's putting that through the filter to say, is my client going to say yes? Because that has happened to me often in recruiting, where it's I'll get to I'm on a lot of recruiter shortlists and they're pitching me all the time, but I don't have a number of years experience that they need yet to then go land that job. So as much as a recruiter really loves me, my journey has been stopped a few times at the next level because they haven't been able to pitch my resume to that client. Is that a fair evaluation, Connor?
Yeah, I think you nailed it.
And now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, one thing that springs to mind is, for example, Irene Woods at the Field. She'll hire 16-year-old kids in the summer holidays, for example. That obviously they're not going to have a full CV or anything like that, and you're getting them for a specific role, which is starting fires and things like that. And obviously that's going to have a lot less of a rigorous kind of recruitment process. And one thing I saw that she does, or similar kind of businesses like that do, is Facebook groups are a great way to find people like that, where even if it's the company or the owner of the company puts in a local Facebook group, hey, we're looking for 15, 16-year-olds to get some work experience in the summer, get some pocket money and all that, and their parents might be the ones that see it and they'll pass it on to their kids, and just stuff like that, especially for the informal stuff. Little kind of mini communities like that, I think, can be pretty good as well. But then obviously,
that's also where Irene's gonna have her first challenge. I think I would love for her to franchise, and I'm pushing him let's franchise this out, but the human resourcing is so specific to her emotional intelligence level, is that there is no way that is going to kind of transcribe into a franchisee operational manual. You know what I'm saying? And that will be hard for the for how that gets developed for anybody that tries to franchise, especially if your brand is coming from a place that's homegrown, and these people so intimately that it's going to be really hard to translate that hiring practice to other properties unless she does it.
I think that applies to scaling in general as well. Is you look at the auto camps and maybe the under canvases, and to me, I don't think you could ever get as good of an experience at a kind of big branded, 30 location chain as you would at, at the Fields, for example. But I also don't think the Fields could scale to.
That's where like Connor's job would have to come in as a recruiter to make sure all the senior leaders are like mind, right? So then that will trickle down. So that's why recruiting, like I'm not a
Yeah.
fan. I'm not a fan of people like jumping recruiting company. Like if you find a recruiter that you really like, then you should stick with them for your business because they're part of the culture cultivating, right? Like if you're influencing these hires as a recruiter, that is one way to kind of control what happens further downstream, I guess, is that if you can hire like-minded people at the top.
But it's easier said than done, presumably, right? So if you've got to make sure that your senior staff, let's say you've got Irene, let's say she wanted to open another 5 locations, she would have to have absolute faith and confidence that the people directly below her understand exactly what she wants, understand exactly what each site needs to implement if they're going to create the Fields 5 times over. I just imagine something like that would be like super challenging, which is kind of why at Posh we're going down the different route of each location is kind of in the vision of the individual operator, so it's kind of a softer brand. But I just imagine it would just be so difficult to scale that unique local founder specific experience without becoming a little bit more corporate and kind of centralized.
The interesting thing so like Irene Woods having one location is if someone comes to work for her, they're most likely going to get a lot more experience and she's probably going to give them a lot more attention and they're going to get a chance to work in a lot of different jobs. The downside is there's not a lot of brand recognition that comes with such a small location. Versus if you go work at like AutoCamp or or a Hilton. If you're talking about a college student who either is doing an internship or it's their first job, oftentimes they're looking to do a resume builder and they want a well-known brand, a reputable brand for their first experience, can be more attractive. And like you might be a paper pusher just doing the same thing every day, but you have a big brand. So there's kind of pros and cons to both.
Did you find, Connor, in your experience that the same companies you would like have repeat clients hiring for like same divisions, or was that ever part of your pitch on why they should like come back to you on the next position hire? Not just that you placed an excellent candidate, but that you could say, I really feel like I know the culture of your company.
It was a huge value add. I mean, us doing our second placement with anyone was always so much easier. We know the team, we know the staff, we know the story, we can sell the dream, we know the process. Like it's way better. It's way better. And to just round off the point of like finding candidates, yeah, like you mentioned, Nick, Facebook groups have become a really big weapon. Like those are huge and should not be overlooked. And then kind of like Jacob was saying, university hospitality programs. So, career fairs or posting jobs at different nearby universities for hospitality or the university overall. And then I know Jacob's mentioned it on a previous episode and you just did, Nick, but cash incentives, either incentivizing your employees, be like, hey, we'll give you $1,000 cash bonus if you recommend someone who gets hired, or posting on Instagram and saying, if you send us someone who gets hired, we'll give you $1,000 cash because it's worth it to hire a good person.
Yeah, to the listeners, I'm going to shout out some schools for you that I've had excellent students from if they want to go down that road. Like UNLV has a great hospitality program, and the 3 people that I've hired from there have had a language minor. So that seems to be like a trend within the college is like, hospitality management major, Spanish minor, which is very helpful. And then Southern Utah University, I've had a few employees from there. That's great. My alma mater, Lakeland College, has a very robust hospitality management major. And then New Mexico State has a really awesome one too. But I've used Southern Utah University a lot. They have it's just like something about the good old kids from Utah. It just like makes like for a very career driven, kind employee experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So that's finding people to interview. Now, let's just before we go into the interview, I know Connor, you're a big believer in mission statements and how that can kind of inform the recruitment process. So, with a particular kind of slant on glamping and hospitality, could you just kind of explain a little bit more about why that's important to recruiting?
Yes. So, one of your most powerful free recruitment tools as a business or a person is your why and your mission statement, and getting people bought into a story and a journey. And it's important to every aspect of your business. So I always tell people when you're starting, it's like, hey, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this personally? And then for your property, and you need to have a really crystal clear answer on why are guests coming to stay at your property? What value do you bring? And the same question for, why would someone want to come work at your property? And if you have a mission statement, I guess the one that I use for my own business, and we adopted it at Sage as well, is, Sage is here to empower outdoor hospitality, to get more people outside and having meaningful connections with nature, themselves, and loved ones, and fostering more environmental stewardship. So it's basically saying that if someone comes and works with you, they're helping get more people outside and having these meaningful connections in nature. And that also can translate to every aspect of your life, as well as if you're raising money, or hiring or convincing guests to come to your property. Having a compelling reason why is the first thing I would start with for your value proposition.
Presumably that feeds into the ongoing culture as well, right? Because what springs to mind is I think Big Noah at Open Sky said that they have kind of customer testimonials or guest testimonials like on the wall of their kind of cleaning area or something like that, and it's just a reminder to staff, and even the cleaning staff who might not necessarily meet the guests, but just to take that pride in what they're doing, and to see kind of how I'll say it again, it sounds ridiculous, but it can change people's lives. Just one amazing weekend away with your partner can change your whole relationship with them, and for staff to see that first before they're hired and then on an ongoing basis, I think that can be pretty powerful in setting standards and setting a culture at any business, but particularly for hospitality, when you can see the effect it has on people.
Also, like, if you don't have a mission statement, put one in now, right? If you hear that, I mean, Mendocino Grove was a high performing company, and high reviews, high revenue, employee satisfaction was above average. But if and when, it always will go off the rails, it's such a key thing that's like a really good safety net. So for Mendocino Grove, in the challenging times, we did have to take a pause to say, like, wait, what are we doing here? Because I'm not aligned with what you're aligned. So let's just walk this back. Even though we're quote unquote successful, in times of challenge, there is nothing like holding water or space for what you're actually trying to do in that moment. So Mendocino Grove didn't get a mission statement until 5 years into the business, until someone says, like, no, this is the moment where that would have been very critical and very important. So we're making it now.
So what was going wrong that led to that discussion?
I just think, like, if I have a goal for the brand that doesn't necessarily like align with the sales manager goal or with the ownership team, and you have to make a decision on hiring, like, or firing, right? Even if you have to make a human resourcing decision, you're like, why am I doing this? Why do we even exist? You have nothing, like, that could be your comp set, right? And if that employee doesn't match that mission statement, or your sales aren't going towards that mission, or whatever, how you're operating kind of it's always in the background, if nothing's in the background driving you forward, then there's also nothing catching you if you fall. So I would say, just like in challenging moments of, like, do we take this group or not, right? Okay, well, let's see what our ethos is. Like, do they match our ethos? If it's not about the money and it's about X, does X match the mission statement? I think it's just really helpful to be a tiebreaker, as well. Yeah.
Exactly. It's your compass. Your mission statement, vision statement, core values. It's your compass, and it helps when you have hard business decisions to make. You say, well, let's look back at our mission statement, and that usually will add some clarity on what the right choice is if you need to make hard decisions and sacrifice something.
Can either of you think of any particularly compelling kind of mission statements, or even just kind of brand values and core values of any hospitality businesses?
Well, I was just speaking with Blake Smith recently, and his thing is, getting people out into nature and having a real disconnected experience that's slow and intentional in nature. And I was having a chat with him. He's like, oh, we've had private equity firms approach us that, want to put 100 units on the property. And I'm like, no, like that's not us. Like that, they will not have a meaningful experience in nature on this property if there's 100 units. There's just not enough nature left. So that's just kind of that's a really clear example of sticking to that.
Well, and then back to your hiring is like, if you have core values, they're going to inform what questions you're asking to your applicant, right, and your candidate. And then how they answer those questions should inform how close they are to the core values that your team has established.
It's an awesome filter. It'll get the right people on the bus and it'll turn away the wrong people who aren't aligned.
I have actually had to write an essay for one of the GM positions that I was hired for, and the brief was they gave me their core values and their mission statement, and it was like, please write down, one, your initial reaction to this core value, and then two, how have you seen this manifest in your career or something to that point, right? So they force you in that applicant process to really think about how you're going to align with these core values. And let's say they have 7 core values, like if I'm remembering correctly, like you can get through the 4 or 5 pretty easy, and then it's like, oh, there's 2 that maybe you've never touched before or never thought about, right? So it really can make you dig deep on that through the interview process.
Hello, listeners. This is Sherry Halala, founder of Sage Outdoor Advisory. If you're launching an outdoor hospitality project like glamping, we can help. We offer feasibility studies and appraisals. What that means is we look at your specific market and proposed business offering and complete an in-depth analysis to make sure that your planned business will be profitable. Getting a second opinion on your proposal and forecasted financials is critical to understand before you spend years of your time and hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is particularly important if you are looking to raise money for your project from a bank or private investors. They are going to want to see this type of deep dive analysis from an independent third-party specialist in the industry. We at Sage have completed well over 250 feasibility studies and appraisals in outdoor hospitality in North America in the last 4 years. So we understand what it takes to bring a project from concept to reality. If this sounds like it could be helpful to you, you can go to our website, sageoutdooradvisory.com, and schedule a call with our team. While you're there, check out our proprietary glamping database map too. Thanks. Now back to the show.
So speaking of the interview process, Connor, I'd be intrigued to know, kind of, you've obviously developed, or you applied these kind of principles that you picked up at the recruitment company, and I'd be interested to know, to get a walkthrough of how you would interview a prospect and let's say specifically a glamping hire. Let's say you're trying to hire a head of hospitality. What kind of interviewing techniques would you apply, and how would you kind of filter through those candidates?
There's 2 main questions we're trying to answer when we're interviewing someone. And the first question is, can they do the job? And that's more skills based. And then the second question is, will they do the job? And that's more motivation based, kind of what Jacob was talking about at the beginning. And I guess I'll start with the skills based. And skills kind of comes down to 2 main components that you're trying to assess. And the first is, what experience do they have currently or like in their past where they can hit the ground running and they don't need training? They already have the skills they need to do the job. So that might be questions like, tell me about a time when you managed a reservation management system, or tell me about a time when you hired housekeeping, or tell me about a time when you managed a social media account or an email list. Tell me about the times where you are familiar with the tools and the skills that we need to do this job. So understanding how much can they do on day 1 with no training. And then the second part of the skills test, which is kind of what Jacob was talking about, which is, how's their aptitude? How is their speed at being able to pick up things that they don't currently know? So you could ask questions such as, tell me about a time where you on a job and you had to learn a new skill. Tell me about a software that you've taught yourself or had to learn for a job, and asking questions around that. And the biggest thing that I'm looking for, and maybe Jacob could attest to this because he was saying, my resume didn't always fit my job. So like if I'm looking at Jacob and I'm like, oh, I need him to be a guest experience manager, but he technically hasn't had that role before, I'd be really diving into his background. And what I would be looking for if he doesn't have the exact skills that I need, I would be saying, does he have a track record of success? And you might have zero of the skills that we need, but if you show a demonstrated track record of success in your past 5 years at all the things that you've done, even if they're not related, that's what I'm looking for to show that you can get up to speed and learn something and find a way to get a win, even if it might take a little bit of time. So usually I'll be like, hey, tell me about the hardest thing in this job. Tell me about your biggest accomplishment at this position. And really going through that journey. And when I'm sitting down for an interview, like I start at the beginning, like, if it's school, where did you go to school? Why did you choose that? Why did you choose that major? Did you stick with it? All right. And then we get into your first job choice. How did you find out about your first job that you took? Why did you take that job? Was it what you expected? What was your favorite part about that? What was your least favorite part about that? Why did you leave is a super important question. And I guess that's a little bit more. I'll kind of pause there on the skills piece before we get into motivation, because I'm kind of moving into motivation. But yeah, Jake, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, no, I think that is the right tactic. I've also I've gotten the question of like how did you manage just how do you project manage, right? So then do you have to get the full cycle, and then allows you to get feedback, or what is a skill that you developed recently, right? Where it's oh, so then that's important to acknowledge that there's always continued growth and professional development, right? So if that becomes a challenging question for someone, then that could be a little yellow flag about, ooh, they're not out there actually learning new skills, or they can't articulate a new skill that they've learned recently, which also kind of leaches into the motivation piece. I will say that, to Connor's point, I think athletes have a leg up in hiring. If you can weave that into your story, because automatically that triggers someone that's doing the interview process, that they know how to attain goals. There is motivation beyond whatever. So I think athletes have a huge leg up in the how they're getting perceived. I also to the point of the switching majors. I started as a biology and education major, which I always try to weave into my story, because my base whole reason to go to college is I wanted to be my high school alma mater's volleyball and tennis coach. So that was my whole core being was came from a place of care and education. And yes, although that does not directly translate to what I ended up going to school for, which was hospitality management, my building blocks that I'm showing those recruiters or that person interviewing is that I'm coming from a place of care, and that I definitely want to teach people, and that's who I am as a person, right? So that's my counter to the not completing the first major. And not that it really comes up, but I do think it definitely helps me to say this is who I am as a core, and that was my home. And then it follows up with, but then I realized you can get paid for being nice to people, and that's hospitality. And so, that's kind of the hook, line, and sinker of it all. But yeah, Connor, you're correct on the what's in the house, which then will lead to the motivation.
So moving into the motivation piece, this is kind of more fun and tricky, and trying to get to the core of someone's being and see what makes them tick. And you could start with more general questions like, why do you get out of bed for work in the morning? What are you passionate about? What are you excited about? Those are all good things. What's your personal mission statement? What really inspires or energizes you? Those are all good questions. I think maybe the part I might pay a little bit more attention to is really digging through their career history, and finding out why they took their last job. What was the motivation for taking it? What were you hoping to get out of it? And then when you got there, what did you find out? And then ultimately, why did you leave each position? And you want to find out, did they leave their last position because they were plateauing in their skills, because it got hard, because of compensation, because of a lack of upward mobility, because of the purpose of the company?
I was curious, I think we're all in roles where there's been a strong reason for why we've got into it. Jacob, I think you've got the heart of hospitality. Connor, you've been for example at Sage, you're super passionate about getting into the outdoor business, for example, and it was the perfect kind of opportunity for you at the time. I have always wanted to be in entrepreneurship, and I've got goals around my life that I require entrepreneurship to achieve. But what
Like getting a date.
Yeah. I'm going on Saturday.
Little callback.
Call back.
Go and listen to the Christmas special if you haven't already. What would you do? The elephant in the room is that a lot of people do just take jobs because they need money, right? Like, I mean, Jacob, obviously, I presume you're passionate about what you're doing in Carmel, but you just said you need more cash, right? How would your reaction be if you were trying to hire someone for your glamping site and they said, what was the reason you took your last job? And the first thing they said was, well, I needed money. Like, are they dancing around the subject? Yeah, tell me what you think.
I think that's not the person, but if that same person said, I know my worth, or I know my value, or I have a strong drive to prove my personal value, that's how you answer that question. The smoke and mirrors of it all is like, yes, it's about money, but I would hear that and be like, oh, clever. It's just like that scene in Jurassic Park where that like raptor's coming
Clever
and it's like,
girl.
oh, clever girl. It's like that. I can work with that personality, like, because clearly they know them, So, yeah, that's how I'd answer that question. Is like, I've learned to acknowledge my personal value and worth, period, and then just let that person take that in.
Nick, you mentioned at the beginning about hiring horror stories, and I think the biggest detriment to an organization is turnover. It's like when you now and seasonal staffing is going to be very important, particularly Jacob and what you did, hiring extra help in peak season. I'm not really talking about that. I want to make sure we're talking about a key full-time member of the team who's going to be there for multiple years. And so the most detrimental thing to the momentum of a team is when someone leaves. And 90% of recruitment is like, how can I find a person who's not going to leave in the first 6 to 12 months? Because most people's value to a company is extremely low in their first 3 to 6 months. I mean, they're mostly just taking, you're giving them knowledge and training them, and they're not providing that much value. So I would say like in the first 6 months of an employee, they're actually like net negative. And then it's only after that they start to add value. And so the whole strategy is, how can I find someone who's going to be with us for the long haul? And that's where that motivation really comes in. And to your question, Nick, if someone said, I took my last position because of money, well, that's not necessarily a negative, but there's a million ways you can make money in this country, right? And if someone's primary motivator is cash, they're probably not going to get that highest paying job in outdoor hospitality as well.
It was a bit of a kind of facetious question, and I do think especially if you're hiring in hospitality, it is a distinct industry with a distinct kind of person that you want to hire, and usually there is that why to it. Maybe I'm thinking more, if you're hiring at McDonald's, for example, where most people are probably there just because they need it, they need a job. In a lot of walks of life, they need a job. But I think hospitality is different.
It comes up when people are making lateral moves. If you're in a small destination market, like your listeners are going to have this, right? They are they're in Yosemite Valley. They have a finite member of team members and employees available for that. Compensation, the lifestyle, it all matters. But like if you're trying to poach a housekeeper, or because that they're very loyal, right? To Connor's point, is like they stay, and it would take a lot to move them. That compensation might. So I think new hire is different than trying to get someone to join the team laterally, right? It's coming from a different pressure and kind of motivation for the job. But it comes up all the time in like Mendocino and Little River. It's like, is our starting rate for housekeeping enough? If we're at 2022 and everybody else is at 25, I don't really feel like I can compete with that hourly rate, but that's the market rate. I don't have the budget for that rate. Like, then you are trying to, it's the other way. You are trying to pitch that person that they should be your housekeeper instead of going down the block to be that company's housekeeper. Um, so you do need to have some awareness on where you are in the market. And I think Connor had those, you would have those calls with your clients if you were getting feedback from candidates that you really, really love, to say like, hey, our compensation isn't really hitting the mark for the quality of candidates that I am finding because they're here with these packages. So I do think that business owners and managers should be aware on where they sit in the comp set for sure.
And you're going to have restricted budgets, right? No one's got an unlimited budget. And most of the times we don't have more cash to throw at that problem. And if you do, great. But if you don't, then it's like, that's when mission statement becomes really important, because someone might be able to, work long hours or make a couple bucks less an hour if they're really tied into their impact. We're in a day and age where people are a lot more focused on working in purpose-driven jobs, and there's a big exit from, jobs that are, degrading or, not boring, or they don't feel like they're making a positive impact. And we're in the age of choice where people have more choice. And so really showing people the impact that they're making on the customers or the land, and how they're making a difference is a lever that you can pull to incentivize them.
Yeah, your personal reputation in the community, I think, goes a long way, right? Like, especially if you're in a smaller market, like, Mendocino Grove was definitely the benefactor of like, yeah, the locals wanted their kids to work there because they could trust the ownership team and that their children would be taken care of, and, that it's a culture that they can see and touch and feel, so like, also like, I think, on both sides, like if you have your mission statement, you have your reputation, those are kind of your levers, right?
I think again of Bolt Farm, they if they have an opening, which is very rare these days, but if they have a random opening last minute that they can't fill, they'll one of their staff members will stay at the site as well, and their reasoning for that is it lets the staff the staff only ever really see a problem or an experience from the staff's perspective, but it changes their perspective into the guest perspective, and they might spot things that they wouldn't otherwise spot. They might have ideas for improvement that they might not otherwise have, and obviously it's a nice thing to do to let your staff stay in a $600, $700 a night treehouse. So little things like that as well, I imagine, can contribute to that culture and those standards as well.
What you said, the interview nightmare? Do you have something that comes to mind, Connor?
So a huge lesson learned for us at Sage, when we were first building out our database, we hired a bunch of summer interns to help us with that, and it was rough, because
I was gonna say, I'm just pouring salt on like old.
Yeah, it was just rough because I've totally moved away from part-time people. I've totally moved away from summer interns or people that would just work for you for a little bit, because by the time they get up to speed and they understand the systems and the communication style and they're trained, they leave. And it's just a huge time sink. And I would so much rather have one full-time committed person than three part-time interns. It's just so much work to train people. So I'd rather go all in on one person. And one other thing that I think's important about when you're structuring your interview process is, and we were kind of trained to do this, in our world, we had something, it was called the JMI3. So it was like a job with multiple interviews. And it was basically, if we had 3 candidates interviewing for a position, 3 final candidates, that means there might have been a lot more, but 3 finalists who were doing like a final interview with the team. One, it allows the internal team to see 3 different candidates and and make a choice and be bought in on who the person is, be bought in on who gets hired, and they're choosing from 3 great people ideally. But one thing that's really important is I want my interview process for the candidates to be like hard and meaningful. It was so funny. I just took like a super cheap job at a yoga studio so that I could do the teacher training for like half off. And there literally was no interview process. I just got hired. Like I filled out an application and I just got hired. Like no one even called me. And I remember thinking I was like, oh, do they just hire anybody? Like I felt no loyalty. I didn't feel like I earned anything. I felt no commitment and no loyalty to that organization. And, I had to quit because of scheduling things, but I didn't feel bad about it because I was like no one even really called me for this job. But on the opposite side, like if your candidates, and I would always tell them, I'd be like, hey, I just want to let you know, like we had 100 applicants for this job and I'm interviewing 10 of them and you're of the 10 that I'm interviewing. And then if they made it to the final 3, I'd be like, hey, just want to let you know, like out of the 10 candidates, you're in the top 3 now. And then if someone gets the position, I just want to be like, hey, I just want to let you know, like there were some really talented people in this. You made it to the final interview with the whole team and then you passed reference checks. And you're the 1 in 100 that gets this opportunity. And there's so much more buy-in with that, and they feel like they earned something, which they did. But like you want to make that known to them, and I think it's better for everybody involved.
Yeah, I mean, and also at that point, Connor was swimming in different waters. He was swimming in water that had gold flecks at the bottom of the pond. So there is a need to keep your applicant interested because you're not the only person courting the said one out of a couple dozen for that position. So that is, I think, if there was like a criticism of the recruitment world, is that like recruiters try to keep you pumped up and elevated and engaged in this very arduous process because they want you to feel like it is going very well so that you can get to that final stage and so they can present 3 or whatever. So it's a hard kind of dance because at any point those candidates could break away, right? And just say, this is not worth it for me anymore. I don't feel like I'm as close as you're telling me. So there's this like give or take. It's kind of like my other world, which is real estate, right? Where it's like you're trying to keep all the parties like really excited about the deal, so the deal doesn't just fall apart out of your control. And so you kind of are just like carrot and a stick, and so it's hard to like the recruiters, the good ones, and I'm sure Connor was, and the good recruiters that I've interfaced with, they keep you excited, but they're fully transparent. Where they say, Jake, I'm really excited about your resume. I do think that you should be in the final interview. I'm doing everything I can to explain that to my client because there's no doubt that they should take you there, right? And at least that's coming from a different place, and a more transparent place. But there are recruiters out there that will say, you're there, you're in it, I can feel it, it's so close, and that might not be true. So you really have to build the trust of your candidate. And that goes back to, like, I think, Connor, what you're alluding to when you're with an applicant or a candidate that would be like your full-time front desk supervisor, is like the trust building happens right away. It happens at the job post. It happens at the details. It's just like there's nothing more deflating than reading a job description that you get excited about, and then your very next call, it's whittled down a little bit, right? Then you get to the second interview and it gets whittled down even further. And by the time you actually get to the space of like signing on, it's not really what in some occasions it could be something that you weren't thought that you were signing up for, or just didn't match the original posting. So I really think that the trust building starts right away.
100% full transparency, just like what you said. I think that is critical.
How would you brief someone, about, let's say, front of house staff is going to get some shit from guests at some point, right? There's going to be, an ungrateful guest or someone that can never be happy. How would you brief them of the difficulties of the job that are going to come up without turning them off from, going through the whole application process?
Yeah, I think you want to sell the good parts, and you want to be really honest and transparent about the hard parts that are inevitable. And if it was a front desk person, the way I would pitch to them, I'd be like, hey, your role in this company is critical. You are the very first human interaction that they're going to have with our brand, our company, and their experience when they're on the property. So the way you greet them, and if it's with a smile and if it's with warmth and with questions, is going to set the tone for their entire stay with us, and could be the difference between whether it's a mediocre experience or the best vacation they had that year. And then I would also follow up with that and say, hey, and there are going to be times where things are going to go wrong, and maybe someone's going to be coming on site and something went wrong and they might be really unhappy and they're going to come and take that out on you. And that's not fair to you, but your role is to absorb and to deal with that with empathy. And if there's a problem that can be solved, solve it for them. And if there's just damage control and like some human considerations, that's what you're there to deliver as well.
And presumably you'd let them know that that you'll support them in the face of any difficult guest, right? Like Jacob, I remember you said a while back that you've basically been called in to deal with a guest that just couldn't be happy, and at that point you realised, hey, there's nothing that can be done, and presumably at that point you're like to the person who got the shit in the first place, the junior member of staff, that hey, look, this happens.
Yeah, and also like, it's creating a culture in which they feel like, okay, I can take it from the front end, but I don't need to take it from the back end, right? Like I don't need my own staff, like no pun intended for the gay one on the panel here, but like you can't take the shit from both sides of this, right? Like you can't have gossiping employees and backstabbing, especially if you're like there's an opportunity to take it, from the guests. So it's like that goes a long way, where like you create a culture which you can fail. You create a culture in which like you don't have to worry about your feelings being hurt by people that you trust, because the guest is not at that same plane of relationship. So if you can do that, it's a lot easier to kind of prep employees in that way, I think.
Okay. Any red flags that each of you would look out for, and if there's a story of you missing those red flags, even better.
And I just think like some jobs breed certain personalities than others. I'm engaged to be married to a line cook, and that's like a very like could go off the rails pretty quickly. So I just think being aware. Yeah, I think just being aware of like this job, it takes a certain mentality to do this job, and taking that with a grain of salt when you're hiring, right? Like your line cook mentality and the hardiness and the thick skin that needs to be in that position compared to your host, and just make sure that you're not applying kind of those same maybe expectations. You could still have all personalities work in one culture, but yeah, there's a lot of red flags in that world when I'm thinking about like helping food and beverage hires. It's just like, how focused is that person? If they're like a little kind of sporadic, that's probably how they're going to be on the line, or they're quick to like judge or flip. So that's easy. But active listening skills, right, goes a long way. Like if you're interviewing someone, so if they have a lack of that, that's a red flag. Like if there's not like an engagement, or the recall is off, or it's just like very clear that, no attention was being made, and it's probably not, it's a skill that's going to translate. It's also very important to like explain that like you're on like this is a 30-day test run, or whatever your company policies are. Like if you have a probation policy, use it, right? Like if you know you're going to evaluate this employee or this candidate, that this new hire, like make sure you're doing that, and make sure that you're consistently doing that for all your employees. That like I just don't think people check references anymore. Like I still very much check references, so it's like a failure to not check a reference, and I see that failure happening always. So I don't know if it's red flags, but if I'm a candidate and someone's about to hire me and they have not checked my references, I'm not accepting that job. And they're not taking it to the level that they need to take it to have a successful business.
And on the kind of probation period as well, that I think, to me instinctively, that just seems like just complete common sense to do, because if you don't, you kind of risk hiring just good talkers, because I'm sure some people could blag all day long about what they can do and all of that, but until you actually see them in action, until to use your story, Jacob, a kid mentions that they want Lucozade, and until you see them go and get the Lucozade for the kid, even though it's not on the menu, then you won't know whether they've really got that kind of hospitality. Maybe they do if you can check the references, I suppose, and they can pull specific examples, but
yeah, I mean, and my whole life I've been that guy that's like very good at talking, and then it's like, now let's see you back it up. That's been like my whole career for sure. So I think I am a lot of red flags to people's interviews, like just in general. But yeah, I think you just have to enforce those policies.
Connor, any red flags?
Yeah, the probably the biggest one that I'm looking for when speaking with candidates about their past is, if you ask a question like, hey, what was your one of the biggest struggles you had to deal with at this company, or what was your biggest challenge, or what was the biggest bomb that went off while you were working? And I really want to be careful to listen to, how they're speaking about themselves and how they're speaking about others. And if I hear a candidate say something like, "Oh, I had a really bad boss," or "I worked at, you know, a shitty company," or we had terrible customer, we were working with a terrible customer or something, like just the words that they're using to describe others, where they're what I'm looking for is, are they shifting the blame of their problems to other people, and like assigning blame, or are they looking at it more like, hey, we had a tough customer, but here's how, and this is what happened, but here's how we solved the problem. Or like, I had a boss who had this priority and I was looking at a different priority, and this is how we came up with a solution. So it's like, hey, is this someone who's a good team player, and is this someone who's solutions oriented?
Totally. And like, guys, I've been terminated twice in my career. Like, has it prevented me from getting other jobs? I don't think so. Like, but like, to Connor's point, I'm very conscious not to place the blame on others, just to like speak pragmatically about my experiences and the why. Because I'm hoping that, because those people are still on my reference list, they can still call and to check the story or whatever. But yeah, you don't want to cast any doubt that you're not being truthful or transparent or honest. Like, and placing the blame on others, like, definitely casts doubt on like your accountability and how transparent you are in your workplace.
And a note on reference checks and just interviewing in general is like, do not be afraid to ask hard questions that you think, I think oftentimes people don't want to be offensive, or they don't want to pry. Like, you got to ask hard questions, because if you don't, that will come up 3-6 months down the line, and it'll be a big waste of everybody's time. In particular, like if you're talking to a reference, you want to ask very pointed questions, and you want to ask follow-up questions. If you just say like, "Hey, how was this person? Would you hire them again?" It's really easy to kind of placate and be like, "Oh, they were good. Yeah, we'd hire them again." The question I always ask a reference is, "How many people were on your team?" They'd say, there was 10 people on my team. Be like, how would you rank this person out of those 10? Where do they fall?
I think you're so smart, Connor. You're so smart because it's like, yeah, it's like I've answered reference for other people and it's just like so boring. I'm like, what did you just get out of that conversation, actually? Like, you're going to make a higher decision based on those questions? Like, sure, like that's your company, but
Presumably, distilling it to a number like you did just kind of doesn't really give the person being asked the questions a place to hide. Whereas if you just ask them general questions like, how is this person, they know that person, they might still be their friend, they're probably just going to give you the standard answer. Whereas if you be objective and say, hey, where do these rank in the top 10, then I imagine you have a completely different conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because references no one wants to say anything bad about anybody, so you kind of got to like force it out of them a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe questions like, hey, what was their toughest day on the job, or what's their biggest strength and their biggest weaknesses, and try to dig into that. And then when you're speaking with the candidates as well, you want to be really open and honest about it, the hard parts about the job, or like the negatives about the job as well, kind of like you were talking, Nick, like hey, we might need you to work we might need you to work late hours, or you might need to review these like really dreadful documents that are 100 pages or whatever. But you want to kind of pressure test them on the hardest parts about the job to make sure they know what they're getting into. It was funny, we hired 2 people at Sage 6 months ago, and I had the opportunity to chat with both of them in the last month, and I was like, hey, like, how have things been going since you've ramped up at Sage? Like, is it what you were expected? And they both fortunately were like, yeah, it is. It's what we expected. Like the picture you painted met reality. So you don't want to just sell this dream and don't talk about any of the negatives, because then people are going to get on board and they might quit because they were, if false advertising. But at least if you let them know exactly what the hardships are, they can make their decision to self-select out of the process, which will be better for everybody in the long run. Or at least they know what they're getting into, and like Jake said, you're building that trust.
Well, I have no more questions. I don't know whether you guys had any final thoughts or comments before we finish up.
Nick, how many people have you hired since we've all answered that question?
No comment. Why do you think I was asking the questions, not answering them?
No, I mean, I think it's like the courting of finding good employees is like, it's difficult. And, I've definitely had some amazing hires where I'm like, where actually are they in the world? Like, how close are they? Can I get them to do this thing? Like, I'm always like trying to keep a Rolodex of people that I think are really smart, really intelligent, that I've worked for in the past, that like, hopefully something lines up one day where they can enter the universe. But I also think, yeah, being honest on your references are so important. Like, let's just stop wasting people's time on saying like, "Oh, yeah, they're a good employee." I'm like, dude, if my name comes across one of your applicants candidates, I could definitely tell you that I will give you an honest reference on like their challenges and also the why I think they were challenged. Not just say like, this person can't do this task. I would say this person can't do this task because of their inability to organize and prioritize, right? And then you take that how you want to take it. So, but yeah. Hot tip: let's stop giving fake references, people.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe one thing, and it's just like a favorite interview question, and maybe Jake or Nick, you have one, but I think one of my favorite questions to ask people is like, hey, what's something both in your career and in your personal life that you're really proud of? And give people the chance, be like, hey, this is your moment to like brag. You don't need to be humble. Like, what's something you've done that you're really proud of, like your biggest milestone or biggest accomplishment, and like try to give them the opportunity to share both something really personal about them, or something more work related.
I think my favorite. I love that one because that gets people to light up, and if they don't light up, there's your red flag, right? If they're not lighting up on their own personal accomplishment, then just on to the next one. Um, but also, I always like the opportunity to give a redo because I appreciate that, where it's like at the end of an interview to be like, hey, I know we discussed a lot, and I'm sure your brain's on fire as well. Is there like a question that you would like to elaborate further on, or any ideas? Because that happens to me often where I'm like in interview and be like, I should have mentioned this. And then it's just not appropriate because you're way past the subject. So it's always nice to like give somebody the opportunity to go back and like one go back for the interview, just so they can clarify, or if they feel like they missed that, or if the trust wasn't there at the beginning of the interview and you've gained that trust now at the end of the interview, that answer might change. So I love a good go back. That's yeah.
Awesome.
Do you have one, Nick?
No. No. I've actually never even had a job interview. Like every job I've had, I've either just either been so casual that it didn't need one, or it was kind of at Glampitech UK. Literally just got on a call with the founder and like to interview him, and he kind of offered me a job in 2 minutes, and then moved over here.
You've been in the meat grinder
through work. So yeah, so the only interview I actually ever had was there's like in UK schools there's like head boys, like, which is where basically when you're the oldest students in the school go for like this like head position. It basically just looks good on your CV, and you organise like the sixth form parties, and I just completely crumbled, and I've just never had the chance to make up for it since. And I hope I actually don't ever not because I don't want to make up for it, but hopefully Posh goes so well that I'll never have to interview for a job ever again. So
yeah, but don't you feel like you're always interviewing, Nick? I feel like you're always interviewing. Like trying to get capital, isn't that it? Like you're always on
yeah.
the apple box, if you will. Like you're always stumped.
Yeah.
You're always campaigning.
Yeah, Yeah, it's just a specific job interview. It's that's why I was the one kind of asking the questions rather than answering them. So hopefully the two experts gave a good account of themselves, and it's good to be back, boys. I'm sure Jacob, you'll be.
This is the best club ever. This is like, again, it's such an honor.
I missed you guys.
Yeah, it's like it's such an honor. I just get excited every time I get the text message, and I'm like, yeah, whatever the topic could be, like, could we waterboard you for 30 minutes? I'd be like, yes, put it on the camera. I'd love to do that. I
That'll
think
be the live special.
Yeah, something was missing from my life the last 6 weeks. It's good to be back.
Yeah, back on it.
All right. Well, then actually, that comment will make no sense because this will be like 3 episodes into the new schedule. But we're recording this straight after we recorded the first episode of the year. The first joint episode of the year. Sorry, but no, yeah, it's been it's good to catch up, boys. And Connor, I'll see you next month, and Jacob will be on at least a couple of times this year.